In this full and free English lesson, we are going to master 10 new vocabulary words together. These are pretty advanced vocabulary words ranging from B2 to C2 on the Cepher scale. Now, here's what we're going to do. For each word, you will get Number 1, an easy to understand definition of the word using simple, basic language to make sure it's very clear to you what the word means. Then, we are going to take a look at 2 or 3 useful synonyms to draw connections between new words and words we might already know. Next, we will look at 3 example sentences to show the word in context and see how it's really used. Lastly, and most importantly, we will have a personal connection question to help us relate the word to ourselves and our lives. Plus, here's my favorite part. At the end of the lesson, we will read a short story that includes all 10 of the new words, all 10 of the target vocab words in today's video to see them used correctly and in context. So, if you are ready to start, please click like on this video to support me as your YouTube English teacher, and let's jump in. The first word I want to take a look at with you guys today is asset. 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 It's a noun, and here's a basic definition. Simply put, here's what the word means. It's something valuable that a person or company owns. Something of value that belongs to a person or to a company. Synonyms for asset might include benefit or resource or advantage. Yeah, these are all synonyms or similar words to asset. And here are some example sentences. Number 1, her communication skills are a huge asset in her job. Okay, so we have a woman and she has a job, right? And in that job, she has some skills. What kind of skills? She has communication skills. Now, these communication skills, her ability to communicate, these are an asset to her. Okay, that's how we can use asset here. They are an asset to her, but not just an asset. They are a huge asset. So her communication skills are a real advantage for her in the workplace. They are a valuable resource for her. They are a benefit to her, a benefit to her, a huge asset. All right, example sentence number 2. Let's take a look at this. The company listed its financial assets in the report. So this company has some things of value, some things that it owns. It owns some valuable things, right? These are financial assets. These are resources that the company has, and they are financial assets. In other words, related to finance, related to money, right? Okay, so here's a third example sentence. He's a real asset to the team. Why is he a real asset, a real benefit to the team? Well, because of his problem-solving abilities. He has this amazing skill, this amazing ability, right? The ability to problem-solve really effectively. And this skill, this ability makes him a serious asset, a real asset to the team. Having him on the team is a serious advantage. Having him on the team is a real benefit to the team. He is a valuable resource for this team, of this team. Now, here's a personal connection question. And once again, I think this is the most important part of these videos because we need to be able to connect what we're learning to ourselves and to our lives in order to remember them well. Because why would you remember something that has very low meaning to you or no meaning at all, right? If you don't care about something, you're not going to remember it, okay? So we need to find a way to care about these words. We need to find a way to connect them to our lives. What is one skill or ability that you consider to be your most valuable asset at work or school? Okay, so if you think about school, if you think about work, what are some skills of yours that come to mind? Why are you, a good student? Or why are you a good worker on the team? In other words, why is it a benefit to have you on the team at work? Why is having you on the team an advantage, right? So for me personally, I would say that one of my most valuable assets is probably that I speak Chinese. I can speak Mandarin Chinese. It's kind of a unique skill, an uncommon skill, especially in the United States, right? So I would say this is a valuable asset. It makes me a valuable resource to whoever wants to hire me. Having me at the company is a real benefit, a real advantage, a huge asset. Now, that's my personal connection response. Now it's your turn. What about you? You can pause this video and speak out loud if you want some speaking practice, or you can leave me a comment in the comment section of this video responding to this personal connection question. Okay, let's move on to word number 2. Our next advanced vocabulary word to master today is duration. You can say that with me. Duration. Duration. What does that mean? Well, here's a basic definition, a simple definition. It means the length of time something lasts. Yeah, how long does something last? Yeah, how long does something last? How long does it go on for? That's the duration. Maybe some synonyms, some similar words to duration could be span, the span of something, or we could say the length of something, or the period of time for which it goes on, the period of time for which something continues, for which it goes on. Okay, so these 3 words could all be potential synonyms to duration. Now let's take a look at some example sentences, okay? Here's example sentence number 1, the duration. The duration of the meeting was 2 hours. So what was the length of the meeting? How much time did the meeting span? Well, it spanned 2 hours, so that's the duration of this meeting. Ugh, that's a really long meeting, isn't it? I would not want to sit in a 2-hour meeting. That sounds kind of excruciating. Yeah, that sounds kind of unbearable. That sounds like torture, right? Sitting through a 2-hour meeting. Ugh. If you ask me, the length of that meeting is far too long. The duration of the meeting, far too long. Here's another example sentence. They stayed for the duration of the movie, even though it was quite long. Yeah, this movie was quite long. The length of the movie was quite long. Even though it was so long, they stayed for the duration. We could also say the full or complete duration. Now, taking a look at example sentence 3 here, she was sick for the entire duration of the trip. Basically, that means she was sick for the entire trip. Her sickness spanned the entire length of the trip, right? Now, here's a question for you guys. How do you usually spend the duration of a long flight or car ride? For me, these are 2 different responses, 2 very different responses, depending on if we're talking about a flight or a car ride, right? For a long car ride, I will probably just scroll on social media for the duration of the ride, right? For the whole length of the ride. But if we're talking about a plane, sometimes they make you put away your electronic devices, right? So, in that situation on a plane, I prefer to read a book for the duration of the flight. How about you guys? Once again, you can pause the video and reply to this question out loud to practice your spoken English skills, or you can leave me a comment in the comment section of this video. Moving right along with number 3, up next we have correlation. Correlation. I love this word, a very impressive word. If you could use this word, I think people would be very impressed. Here's basically what it means: a connection or relationship between two or more things. Yeah, two things or more things. In other words, how are they linked? How are two things associated? What is the relationship between two things, right? How are they connected? How are they correlated? Let's jump right into these different example sentences. Number 1 here we have, there is a strong correlation between exercise and good health. Ooh, a strong correlation. So they are connected, they are linked, they are associated. There is a relationship between these two things, and not just a relationship, not just a link, not just an association, not just a correlation, but a strong correlation. So in other words, if you have good health, you probably get lots of exercise. And if you get lots of exercise, you are probably in good health. We can say that a person is in good health, okay? Here's example sentence number 2. Researchers found a correlation between what? Well, between sleep and memory. Ah, interesting. Okay, so there is a correlation between these two things: a link, an association, a relationship, a connection between these two things, right? So if you get good sleep, you'll probably have a good memory. And if you have a good memory, you probably get good sleep, okay? Here's sentence number 3. The correlation between effort and success is clear. If you put a lot of energy into something, a lot of effort into something, if you try really hard at something, chances are you will succeed. And if you are successful in a field, in an area, successful doing something or successful at something, chances are you tried really hard, right? You put a lot of effort into that success. We could also say behind that success, there is a lot of effort. So here's a question for us to think about. Can you think of a correlation between two habits in your daily life? Can you think of two habits that you have? What's the correlation? What's the link, the association, the relationship, the connection? What's the connection between them? I have a good personal response to this question. You guys have probably noticed that I'm wearing this nose strip today, right? That's because I've realized recently that I have a deviated septum and it really affects my breathing, and that affects how I sleep. So there is a correlation between my deviated septum and how well I sleep. Now, what about you guys? Can you think of a correlation between two habits or two other things in your life? How are they related, associated, linked, connected? Flying along here, our 4th advanced vocab word to look at and talk about is generic. Generic. What does that mean? Here's a basic definition: not specific or unique, typical, and not brand name. In other words, like a very basic version of something, something that's very common or general or ordinary. Let's take a look at some example sentences here. Here's one. She bought the generic brand of cereal instead of the name brand. Yeah, this is how you will often see this word used. The generic version of something, the generic brand of something versus the name brand. Like maybe there's a name brand soda that's pretty expensive, like a Coca-Cola, right? It's expensive compared to the generic brand. Maybe some generic brand just says, cola, right? That's the generic brand. Coca-Cola is the name brand. So that's one way to use this word. The store's generic layout makes it look like every other supermarket. So this store, the layout of this store, the way this store is arranged or organized or laid out, it's very generic, right? It's very general, very ordinary, very common. It's very typical. It's not unique. It's not unique. It's not specific. Yeah, it's just kind of plain and ordinary. There's nothing special about it. Example sentence number 3 here. He gave a generic response that didn't answer the question directly. Here's an interesting way to use this word. A generic response, okay? Maybe he was asked a question and they were hoping for a specific response, okay? Something that showed a level of deep understanding or expertise, right? But he just gave a generic response, a very basic reply that wasn't very satisfying to them. For example, maybe a boss is asking their employee, what time of year do you want to use your vacation days this year, right? Maybe the boss is working on the yearly schedule. They want to start making arrangements for which employees will take off time from work when. So they ask this guy, what dates is he thinking of taking off of work? And this guy gives a generic response. He says, sometime in the winter. Maybe another way of thinking about this is kind of a vague response. This response is not satisfactory. It leaves the person asking the question wanting more, right? Okay, so here's a personal connection question for us to respond to. Do you often choose generic products or do you prefer name brands? I actually have kind of a funny response to this. When I was a kid and I would go grocery shopping with my mom, she would never let us get the name brand version of things, right? I wanted a name brand soda, a name brand snack, a name brand cereal or breakfast or whatever, right? She wouldn't let us buy it because it was more expensive. Instead, we had to buy the off-brand or the generic brand, right? Not the name brand. What about you guys? Up next, we have unprecedented. Unprecedented. What does that mean? Well, the basic definition is never done or seen before. Hasn't been done before, hasn't been seen before, okay? Maybe some synonyms could be extraordinary or unique. And let's take a look at these example sentences. The company faced unprecedented growth this year. So what is unprecedented? Growth that the company is experiencing, okay? So the company is growing like never before. It has never done this before. It has unprecedented growth, right? So the company has never seen, never witnessed, never experienced growth like this. Okay, that's the first one. Number 2, the storm caused unprecedented damage to the city. Oh no, right? So the city has never been damaged by a storm like this before. It's the first time this has happened. This is a really unique experience for the city, a really extraordinary experience in a bad way, like not a normal experience. This is really unprecedented. Here's number 3. The team's victory was unprecedented in the history of the league. So they've never had a win, a victory like this before. It's the first time this has happened to the team. Personal response now. Can you think of an unprecedented event that happened in your lifetime? I certainly can. I think of all the things that happened in 2020, right? And I'm not going to say exactly what this was. I'm going to give a generic response to this question using our last word, right? A generic response, because YouTube is very sensitive about this, and I don't want to get into specifics of this, but in 2020, the whole world experienced something that was unprecedented for us in our lifetimes, right? We had never seen something like that before. Moving right along, now we have tolerate. Ooh, tolerate, really useful, very practical word here that you guys need to know. Here's basically what it means to accept something unpleasant without becoming too annoyed or upset, right? So you're not happy about this, but you put up with it anyway. You bear it anyway. You endure it anyway. You put up with it. Yeah. Even though you wish things were different, even though the situation is not ideal, you tolerate it. You say, okay, I'll just bear with this for now. I'll just endure this for now. I'll just put up with this for now, right? She could no longer tolerate the noisy neighbors. So it sounds like in example sentence number 1 here, she had been tolerating noisy neighbors for a long time. She'd been putting up with them for a long time, enduring them for a long time. But guess what? She can't do it anymore. She could no longer tolerate them. She's not going to put up with her noisy neighbors anymore. Maybe she calls the police. Maybe she makes a noise complaint. Some people can't tolerate spicy food. Oh, there's another way we could use this word, tolerate. Yeah, for me personally, my stomach can't handle spicy food. I find spicy food to be unbearable. I really can't handle it. So we could say that I can't tolerate spicy food. Some people can tolerate spicy food. They can handle it. Some people can't tolerate spicy food. They cannot handle it. And I'm definitely the kind of person who can't, unfortunately, which is, it's a shame because I really like spicy food. He tried to tolerate the long meetings, but it was difficult. Maybe this is talking about those 2-hour meetings from earlier in this video. Remember, we were talking about 2-hour long meetings and how unbearable that would be. Well, he tried to put up with these meetings. He tried to tolerate them. He tried to endure these meetings, but in the end, it was too difficult. Maybe he even quit the job. So here's a question for you. What is something you tolerate, but you don't enjoy? Interesting question here. I have a very similar experience to example sentence number 1 here. I put up with noisy neighbors all the time, all day long. I have really noisy neighbors, and I'm not going to do anything about it. I'm not going to call the police or anything. I decided that I would tolerate them. I decided that I would tolerate them. I will put up with it, even though it bothers me, even though it irritates me. It's not the end of the world, right? It's not a hill that I'm going to die on. That's another interesting English expression for you guys. This is a hill that I'm not going to die on, right? We have the ability to pick our battles in this life. You can choose what you want to be upset about and what you will not be upset about, what you will tolerate and what you won't tolerate. I've decided that my noisy neighbors, that's something I can and will tolerate. What about you guys? Okay, another advanced word you guys should know is premise. Premise. What is the premise of something? The main idea or foundation of an argument or story. That's the premise. Could be a story, could be an argument. Some other ways to understand this might be the basis of something, the concept of something, the idea behind something. So let's take a look at this first example sentence here. The premise of the movie is a detective solving a mysterious case. Yeah, that's the concept of the movie, you know, the basis of the idea of the story of this movie. So we could say that's the premise of the movie's story. In other words, the movie's story is about a detective solving a mysterious case. So that's our first example sentence. Let's take a look at 2. Her argument is based on the false premise that money equals happiness. Okay, so this woman, she's making an argument. She's making a claim. She has this opinion. What is her argument based on? What is the basis of her argument? The basis is a false premise. That's what this example sentence is telling us. It's a false premise. So it's not a strong argument. What is the false premise? What is this weak argument that we're talking about? The idea is that money equals happiness, right? That's a false premise. We can say that's a false premise because that's not true, right? Or at least lots of people would claim that that's not true. Here's another way we could use premise. The entire business plan is built on a solid premise. This plan, the plan for this business is built on or built upon a solid premise. In other words, it's a really good basis for this business, a really good concept for a business, a really good plan, a solid plan, a strong plan. Yeah, solid just kind of means strong. It's a strong premise, a strong plan. So can you think of a movie or book with an interesting premise? I can, right off the bat. The first thing I think of, the first movie that comes to mind is A Quiet Place. Have you guys seen that movie? Are you familiar with this movie? A Quiet Place. That's all about this world where, you know, there are these monsters, these creatures. I think they might be aliens, right? And they are attracted to sound. If they hear you, then they can see you and they will rush at you and eat you or attack you, right? So that's the premise of this movie. The characters in the movie, they have to be very slow, very cautious, very careful, very quiet, or if they make noise, otherwise, if they make noise, they will attract the attention of the monsters, right? So I think that's an interesting premise, especially for a horror movie, right? Because it's really scary and there's a lot of tension that builds in the movie. There's a lot of silence. You think, are they going to make a noise? Are they going to make a noise? Oh my gosh, you're on the edge of your seat. Right? They don't make a noise. Or maybe they do make a noise and you're like, oh my gosh, this is crazy, right? So it's a really great premise for a movie. Can you think of one? Pause the video, talk about it out loud to practice your speaking skills, or let me know in the comments section. Vocab word number 8. We are almost at the end of today's vocab builder list. What is mandatory? What does that mean? It's an adjective that means required by law or rules. In other words, something that's obligatory, something that's compulsory. Now, you guys might not know these words either. Another synonym might be necessary. If something is necessary, required by the rules or the laws. Like the law says you have to do this thing, so it's mandatory. The rules say that you have to do this thing, so that thing is mandatory, right? Attendance at the meeting is mandatory for all employees. So what is mandatory? Attendance is mandatory. Attendance at what? At the meeting. So sorry, employees, but you have to go to this meeting. It's obligatory, it's compulsory, it's mandatory, it's necessary that you go. That's number one. Two, wearing a helmet while biking is mandatory in some countries, right? That's another way that we could see this word used. Some countries will require that you wear a helmet while riding a bike or a motorcycle. It is mandatory in those countries, okay? Number three, it's mandatory to submit your application by Friday. So that's the rule of this, company, whatever we're talking about here. Could be a company, some kind of business. They have this rule. It's mandatory. It is required that you do this by Friday. So guys, what's something mandatory you had to do recently? Was there a rule that required you to do something, or a law that required you to do something? I remember that when I was living in China, I used to live in China, right? And there were lots of local laws that were different than laws we have in America. As a foreigner, I had to do all of these obligatory, compulsory, mandatory things. For example, when I would move apartments, when I would change apartments, I would have to register at the local police station and let the government know that I had moved to a new address, a new location, right? So that was mandatory, something that was required of me to do. What about you guys? Here's another fantastic word, a really spoken English word. Linger, linger. Yeah, very colloquial, very spoken, this word. What does it mean? To stay in a place longer than expected, longer than you assumed you were going to, longer than you thought, right? We can say loiter or delay, or maybe to just stay somewhere. These could be synonyms. Let's take a look at example one. After the party, a few guests lingered to chat, or in order to stay and chat, right? So yeah, these guests, they didn't just go home after the party. We could also say that they hung around, or they stuck around. They stuck around after the party in order to chit-chat. They weren't done with their conversations. They weren't ready to go home, okay? The smell of the food lingered in the air long after dinner. That's sentence number 2 here. So yeah, the smell of the food, it must have been really fragrant. It must have smelled really strong, really good, right? Because that smell lingered in the air. It stayed in the air. We can't say it loitered or delayed in the air. So be a little careful with these synonyms, okay? They're not perfect synonyms. Let's look at number 3. He lingered by the door, hesitant to leave. Okay, he was lingering, he was staying, he was delaying his departure. He was lingering by the door. He wasn't so sure he wanted to leave. He was hesitant, right? Loitering is more of a legal term. If you are hanging around somewhere, you maybe shouldn't be hanging around. Like, if you are loitering outside of a store, outside of a business, maybe the owner doesn't want you standing around out there talking and smoking or even sitting down. We call that loitering, right? So is there a place where you like to linger because you enjoy the atmosphere? For me, definitely my local coffee shop. Yeah, I go in the morning and I get my coffee, but then I like to linger for a while afterwards. I don't leave right away. I stay for a while because the atmosphere, the vibe of that environment is so nice, so welcoming. It just feels good in there. So I want to linger. I want to stay. How about you guys? Now, as we come to our final vocabulary word for today, I want to remind you guys, don't leave yet. Make sure you watch till the end, because after we finish learning these words, we're going to see them used in a story. So we still have a big chunk of the lesson to get to together, right? I also want to remind you guys that your likes, your comments, your subscriptions, if you want to become a channel member, these things really mean a lot to a small YouTuber like me. So thank you guys for all of your support. You know, I'm so happy to be your YouTube English teacher. I always want to say a quick word of thanks to everyone who watches my videos, because you know, it's a great opportunity to be your teacher, and it's my honor to be your teacher. So thank you for watching, and thank you for giving me and my teaching style a chance. Okay, and with that being said, let's keep going here. Harsh, an adjective. What does it mean? Severe or unpleasant in a way that causes discomfort. Maybe that's a little bit difficult to understand. We could also say like tough or severe or cruel, but it's always best to just take a look at these sentences, right? So the desert's harsh conditions make survival difficult. Okay, so in the desert, the conditions there are very harsh, okay? Surviving is difficult. Surviving is challenging. It's not easy because of these harsh conditions. The sun is hot during the day. The temperatures drop during the night, and it gets very cold at night, right? There's no water or food to be found, right? Resources are scarce. So these are harsh survival conditions. That's one way we could use this word. His teacher's feedback was a bit harsh, but it was helpful. Okay, so, you know, this teacher is giving a student some feedback, giving the student some information, some pointers about how he or she could improve, how they could get better. Maybe they did that in kind of a harsh way, right? Like they were being a little bit too critical, overly critical, pointing out some real flaws with the student. But even though it was harsh, it was also helpful. Maybe, you know, it was what this student needed to hear. Maybe it was a little bit of tough love. If you give someone tough love, then you tell them something that is hard to hear. Maybe it's a little harsh on the ears, right? It's not super pleasant to listen to, not something that they want to think about or talk about, but you're doing it in order to help them, right? Like maybe I have a friend who has a drinking problem. I give him some tough love. I sit down with him and say, hey, you know what? I know you don't want to talk about this, but I think you have a problem. Let's talk about it. That's some tough love, right? So the harsh winter made travel nearly impossible. Once again, we're seeing harsh conditions, right? There were harsh conditions in the desert. During winter, we can see harsh conditions as well, harsh travel conditions, so harsh that it made travel nearly impossible, or almost impossible, right? Now, here's a question. Have you ever had to deal with harsh criticism? Has anyone ever criticized you and criticized you really harshly? If so, how did you handle it? Let's see. If I think about this question, I know for sure that I do not take criticism very well. I would say with my YouTube channel, I've gotten some criticism here and there, like, oh, you should change this, or oh, you should change that. but no one has ever been too harsh with me. People have always been gentle with their criticism, right? It's always been very constructive feedback, constructive or positive criticism when it comes to people giving me feedback about my videos. So honestly, in my life, I haven't had to deal with harsh criticism too much. What about you? You can pause the video, talk about this out loud, or let me know in the comments section. I would be interested to see what you guys have to say about this. Okay, my friends, if you have made it to this point in the video, I want you to take your hand and give yourself a pat on the back. You are doing a fantastic job. We made it through the vocabulary breakdown, and now comes the really fun part of the video where we get to read a short story and see all of the words used correctly and in the context of this story, okay? So the title of the story is The Gold Rush. We're going to talk about a nonfiction story, about real events, a true story, okay? So let's take a look. In 1849, during the height of the California gold rush, thousands of people saw the opportunity as their biggest asset. Okay, they saw this opportunity to go out to California and find gold. They saw this opportunity as a real asset to them and their futures, right? They left behind everything they knew, hoping the journey would only take a short duration. They were hoping that the length of the journey would not be too long. They were hoping for a short trip, but what they didn't expect was just how harsh the journey would be. The heat, the cold, and the tough terrain left many struggling to survive. For most, there was a clear correlation or connection between how prepared they were and whether they even made it to California. Some prospectors lingered in towns along the way, trying to decide if the journey was worth it, while others pushed forward, knowing it was mandatory to act fast if they wanted to find any gold before the best spots were claimed or taken. They chased the premise of instant wealth, but the reality was far different than this premise, right? In truth, they had to tolerate hunger and illness and extreme hardship day after day. When they finally arrived, many found only disappointment, as the rich golden opportunities they imagined were often just generic dreams sold by exaggerators. People who were exaggerating, people who were claiming that this was a way bigger opportunity than it actually was, right? So the unprecedented rush, this rush of people that was unprecedented, that this place, this time had never seen before, meant that even those who worked tirelessly saw little reward. In the end, only a handful truly struck gold and turned their efforts into a success. I want to give a huge thanks to my channel members and Patreon members. There's a big correlation, to use one of today's vocabulary words. There's a big correlation between being a member and learning lots from my videos. In other words, if you become a member, there's a high chance that you will learn a lot more from my videos. Why is that? Well, if you become a member, you get access to PDFs for all of my lessons, and you can use these PDFs by printing them out like I do or using them digitally, and that really takes the learning experience to the next level. You also get hours and hours of bonus videos. Yeah, extra content that is not available to the public. It's only for my members, so you can click join here on YouTube, or you can go to patreon.com/EnglishWithConnor. Once again, I love my members. Thank you guys so much. You make my work here on YouTube possible. I would not be able to do it without you guys. And Also, if you are in the middle of a study session right now, keep going. My videos are the perfect way to study English. All you need to do is click on another video and keep going. I will put one up here on the screen. Click on it and I'll meet you there.